Hi everyone. I had to come up to church today to make some copies for something that I was planning to do in our neighborhood. And I saw the empty sanctuary and it kind of made me a little bit, I don't know, sad's not exactly the word, but maybe like many of you were feeling, grieving some of the loss that we've had by not being able to meet. So I thought I'd come in here and as I was reflecting on the fact that it's Maundy Thursday and Good Friday's tomorrow and we're heading into Easter, and so much is so very different in our time and our experience, and we're not exactly sure what to do with that. And like I said, if some of those mixed feelings, some of those things that are going on inside of you in regard to this, I suspect, as I've read some experts and heard some others talk, that much of that is grief. And grief is okay. Grief is something that is natural and normal in our lives, something that we should not try to avoid or something that we should try to push down, but put it out there in front of us. One of the scriptures that is sometimes quoted to us about grief is that we are to be a people who grieve, but we grieve with hope. We grieve differently, and so there is that hopefulness element to it, but it's grief nonetheless. Passover has just begun, and for Jewish people, that is a high holy day, I believe. And for Christians, for those who follow Jesus, as I said, it's Maundy Thursday. And Jesus had gathered his disciples on that Thursday, that Maundy Thursday of Passover. It wasn't Maundy Thursday then, it was just a Passover feast that he was celebrating with his disciples. And what I think is interesting about that moment, especially in our time, is that Jesus gathered his disciples to reframe a story. They were Jewish people. Jesus and his disciples were all Jewish. And so this Passover feast was a significant part of the rhythm of their lives as they remembered God's faithfulness through time. And to them as a people. And they were in a rough situation at that time, being occupied by the Roman Empire, and things were very different and very unsettled for them, as it were. And so Jesus takes this opportunity at this Passover feast to kind of reframe or redefine that story a bit, to maybe broaden it even beyond their experience of being freed from slavery in Egypt, the Exodus, which is a large part of what Passover celebrates. And so Jesus redefines Israel's defining story about who they are in terms of who he is and what he's doing. His life, death, and resurrection are all in view for Jesus. And they are not in view in the same way for the disciples. So Jesus has a big task before him as he does this. It's a powerful moment. It's a beautiful moment that we have in Scripture. But in that moment, between the centuries of what was and the promise of what will be, are this confused people. This gathered group sitting in a room trying to make sense of what Jesus is saying and doing, trying to hold on to that story from their past that was important. The Old Testament is filled with those admonishments to remember that I am the God who rescued you. I am the God who brought you out of Egypt. And they're looking back at that story and they're wanting to hold on to that, to celebrate something normal in their lives in a world that is very unsettled. And Jesus is redefining that. Jesus is doing something there that really is mystifying. It's become so kind of commonplace for us to hear that language as followers of Jesus, people who share in the Eucharist and communion, that we maybe lost the sense of tension that the disciples would have felt that evening as Jesus gathered them for the Last Supper. And so as Jesus sort of tells this story of covenant and love in his body and his blood and the bread and the cup that had traditional meanings and significance, they're really struggling. And what we discover in this story as we have it in the Scriptures is that their confusion really only starts to dissipate on the other side of the events that Jesus is seeing, that Jesus is looking toward, and that are about to unfold with his arrest and his trial and eventually his execution. But right now, they're sitting in a room being told a new story as part of an old story. And it's hard. It's difficult. And friends, I think we're in that very same kind of place. This margin, this boundary, this space between what was and what will be. And we can't yet see what will be on the other side. And so we have this same confusion. We have this same frustration, this same bank of questions that probably roll forward. What will it look like? And this is what I was thinking of as I sat in this sanctuary, came into church today to an empty church. And part of our story, part of our history, part of the reality that we want to look back and hold on to are full sanctuaries on Easter. That there are these moments where church and our church family and our faith, we want them to take center stage in our lives and to provide us with answers, to provide us with hope and promise. And yet, we're stuck in our homes, places we can't go. And so how do we access all of that? How do we look forward with hope? And I would love to be able to speak to you today a word of explanation and clarification, a way of explaining exactly what will unfold and how it will happen, and to bring a sense of calm, to tell you that everything will be not just okay, but will be like you remember it. But I can't do that. We don't know what it's going to look like. We don't know what's going to unfold. And Jesus and his gathered disciples on that night before his death were in the midst of a very major shift in their world, just like we're in the major shift in our world. We know it, we're experiencing it, but we don't yet see it. We don't yet see what it will look like on the other side. In John 16, Jesus lays out a lot of difficult information about his imminent death and how all the surrounding events are going to feel. And he warns of a world, or he tells of a world, or he likens this world, this shift, to something like a woman giving birth to a child who's experiencing pain. But he then says a woman experiencing pain in childbirth endures that for the sake of the joy that comes in the birthing of that child. When that child is born, when that future comes and we can sort of see it and begin to imagine what it looks like. But we're in the midst of that birth-giving moment in history and time. I don't want to overstate it, but it's a big moment. And it's a hard moment, and it can be a painful moment. And so Jesus is explaining all of this in John 16, and still the disciples really just aren't clear about what Jesus is trying to say. It's almost beyond their imagining what he's trying to tell them. And so in 16:31, towards the end of the chapter, Jesus says this. After they said, "We believe that you are the Son of God. You're telling us things that are blowing us away." I had a guy one time tell me, "I don't ever really understand what you're saying. You must be really smart." And I don't know if that was a compliment or what, but it was a strange moment that somehow my incomprehensibility makes you sound or smart or affirms. And that's sort of what the disciples are doing here. It's like, Jesus, we have no idea what you're saying, but that must mean that you're just smarter. You just get things. You understand. You are the Son of God, and we're just going to trust you on that. We believe. And Jesus says in the next verse there, "Do you now believe?" And it seems to me, and I don't know this for sure, but it seems to me that there is a kind of doubt that Jesus is expressing in that question. He's really asking, do you really believe? Because he doesn't, I think he knows that they don't really understand yet what he's doing and what he's trying to tell them. And so he goes on, and he says, the time is coming and in fact has come, when you will be scattered, each to your own home. Does that sound familiar? You will leave me all alone, yet I am not alone, for my Father is with me. And Jesus next spoke to their disciples, and his next words here speak to the disciples in their unsettledness and their confusion. And these next words that Jesus is going to speak offer to us that same kind of hope in the midst of our unsettledness. And so after he says, "Yet I am not alone, my Father is with me," he says, "I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world." So friends, with Maundy Thursday and Good Friday coming, and that grief that you're probably feeling, I would encourage you to let that grief be what it is. Mourn the loss of the things that we're not experiencing and not having that we've come to expect. But don't lose hope. Don't despair. And remember the words of Jesus, who's told us all these things, acknowledged all the difficulties and frustrations, and then says, "But I want you to have peace in me. Because in this world we'll have trouble. But take heart, for he has overcome the world." I love you all, and I hope that you are experiencing the peace that passes all understanding as you're coming and learning perhaps more to put your heart and trust in him. Thanks.